Could you share a little bit about your knowledge on these astral cities? Like, is it sort of that some souls just go up to fourth dimension and incarnate, and fourth dimension and incarnate, and others sort of come from a higher dimension and down?
Yeah, exactly. So there's so much out there. This takes me back to Emanuel Swedenborg and his experiences that he had in the 19th century. There's this astronomer, inventor, mathematician, Emanuel Swedenborg, was born in Stockholm, but then I think he lived most of his life in Uppsala, um, who was an incredible scientist of his time, from the 17th and 18th centuries. And it was pretty much, some people would say that it would be the equivalent to, it would be the Swedish Newton, or Newton would be the English Swedenborg. But eventually, Swedenborg had a change of mind because he started astral projecting spontaneously, like we do, like I've done, and incredibly prolific, and even in a more prolific manner than I have. He's had incredible experiences, not just with astral projection, but also experiencing time lapses. And let me tell you, Yannicka, he experienced most of his time lapses in Stockholm. I've had a time lapse in Stockholm, so there's something about Stockholm. I feel like in Sweden, I feel like there in that city, you have a couple of time lapse loopholes at least. Anyway, so but that's in my book. People can go check it out if they want to know about time lapses as well. Swedenborg, in his several writings, because then he had to do what I had to do. He had to put everything into writing. He was a scientist. Let me put it all into writing and try and understand it. He speaks of different worlds and uses the language of religion because that's the only, he was Christian Lutheran, that's the only language that he had at his disposal back then. So for instance, instead of talking about astral cities of light, he talks about uh, many heavens, different heavens. Instead of talking about the threshold, as I call it, he talks about many hells. And then for the ascended masters, as we call them, or light mentors, he calls them angels and archangels. But we're all talking about the same thing, right? But this was a man whose father was the Bishop of Skara, so the language of religion is what he has to use. But he's describing the same thing. And at one point, and this could answer your question, at one point, I was floored when I read this because these are my experiences as well. He talks about speaking from souls in the ether that inhabited the ether of their planets, but they weren't in those astral cities or heavens, as you would call them. They weren't in the threshold, or one of those hells that he talks about, which are basically astral cities of density. Um, so where are these souls? Where and what he says basically is that every planet has a layer around it where you have souls stranded in the fourth dimension, but not in the astral cities, in between astral cities, just hanging out. And that's where a lot of what we call dreams also belong. So this is what the fourth dimension is. You have the astral cities, but in between the astral cities, just like here, you have spaces. You have spaces between the astral cities, like let's call them astral roads, astral paths, where souls can hang out in between lifetimes, or deciding where they want to go after this lifetime, or simply because they are lost. And because the fourth dimension is huge, Annika, it's not just one thing. It's not just where you have the astral cities. It's also where we as souls literally just go to hang out at night when we leave our bodies. And we don't feel like going to an astral city. We don't feel like going to a higher dimension. Or maybe we are not even a vibration yet for a higher dimension. So we stay in 4D, and we hang out and we meet each other. We meet each other all the time in 4D. You know those dreams that you have where you're just meeting with people at the supermarket or the market, or going shopping, or you're just doing nothing, just talking babble, or you're speaking to your family member, just nothing special is happening, but you're meeting people and doing things. You're just busy and kind of mimicking our life here. That's why we meet in places like coffee shops or schools, or because we are mimicking our lives here in the 4D, right? So that also happens in the 4D, right? These spaces between the astral cities, and there are spaces where we simply hang out in 4D. That's why sometimes we wake up from a dream And people ask us, what was your dream? Oh, nothing special. Oh, but I think I met this friend that I hadn't seen in a very long time. That was you hanging out in 4D, where we meet each other all the time. So I don't know if this answers your question. If maybe that person that came on your podcast, when he said that he was meeting with other spirits and souls, that was the fourth dimension of some other planet or this planet. And that happens to me a lot as well. I've astral projected into other planets where I'm speaking to people from those planets that are hanging out in their fourth dimension, in that layer after the earth, after the planetary crust. So when I speak of, in my book, when I talk about going astral projecting to other planets and speaking to people from other planets, what we here call aliens, I don't like to call them aliens very much because they're just, most of the ones that I've met are just people like us. You know, I've gone to exoplanets where you have beings that look very much like us with a few differences. We meet in the 4D. I'm not meeting in the 3D with them because we are meeting in what here we here call dream state. So our consciousness are meeting. So where are we meeting? In the 4D.
Yeah, the 4D, I get that that's sort of like this in between state, but isn't the astral series a bit higher? You said it was sort of like a heavenly like place. That's 5D.
Let me tell you, at first, when I first started having these experiences, I assumed reading, I remember that when I first started having these experiences, I grabbed the book called The Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, The Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions by Barbara Hand-Clow. And as I'm reading that book where she, you know, speaks of these nine dimensions of existence, she speaks of the dimensions up to the 12th, but the ninth dimensions of existence, according to her, are where we have the most experiences because the 12th would be the creator's dimension. And I remember thinking, okay, so these beautiful astral places that I'm seeing can only be the seventh, the eighth, the ninth dimension, something much higher. I've come to understand, and especially upon reading a lot on Brazilian anthroposophy and also French anthroposophy with Allan Kardec, especially also Brazilian anthroposophy with Edgar Armand and Francisco Xavier, who are Brazilian spiritualists and anthroposophists from the early 20th century. I remember at one point I came to the conclusion, and I've also confirmed this with a couple of my guides, that all of it is the force, because those higher dimensions, those higher light dimensions start from the fifth all the way to the ninth. So when people talk about the fourth dimension, most New Agers think of the fourth dimension as something mundane. And you can see it however you like, either mundane or not. But it is celestial. It's the ether already.
Hmm.
It's not where Jesus Christ is. I can tell you, it's not where the ascended masters are, but it's where we go to. The ascended masters are in the sixth and seventh and eighth dimensions. um, I can tell you that what I've been told is that the Christ consciousness is an eighth dimensional, what we would call Jesus here, Yeshua, is a seventh to eighth dimensional being. So the fourth dimension is the ether, is already celestial.
To watch the full video, click the link below, and I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel.
Resto maliata falia. Tan shavra leto.